On this episode of the Contagious Influencers of America podcast, #1 New York Times bestselling author Lysa TerKeurst opens up about her divorce and what she struggled with the most in her relationship, boundaries.
I was giving level 10 access, and other people were only bringing level 3 responsibility to the level 10 access I gave them. So it used to be that I would try to put a boundary on that other person to get them to be more responsible with the access that I'd given them. I need to do boundaries the healthy way, which is I create a boundary in the situation around myself.
I'm David Sams, your host of CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, and we have one of the best in the house when it comes to inspiring and healing words today, and I'm talking about author Lysa TerKeurst. And I can't wait for her to get here in the studio. This is going to be a good one. Lysa is the president of Proverbs 31 Ministries that has tons of free resources like devotions, podcasts, and Bible studies for women. She has a massive following on social media, something like 1.5 million followers on Facebook alone. And oh yeah, she happens to be a best-selling author, not once, not twice, but she's got something like 25 books out there. Her latest is what we're going to be talking about here today, and it's called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, Loving Others Without Losing the Best of Who You Are. It's all about stopping the dysfunction of unhealthy relationships by setting boundaries. Now, Lysa has really learned this firsthand. She has done thousands of hours of counseling intensives and extensive theological research to really understand healthy relationships and boundaries. In this interview, she will tell us about the boundaries she has used to set and why they were so unhealthy, and what she's doing differently now, and what you can do on your end. In her own words, she says, "You will be relieved to learn that boundaries aren't just a good idea, they are a God idea." So don't worry, she will explain how it's not unloving or selfish to set a boundary when done right. So let's get to the interview. But first, let's take a quick poll. Does your love life need a little improving? Now, if you're nodding your head yes, that's okay. You're not alone. Single, dating, married, no matter what stage of life you are in right now, LoveStories.com has answers for you. LoveStories.com is your destination to discover the love, happiness, and purpose you deserve. Now, LoveStories.com has all different educational programs that you can pick and choose from to fit any of your needs. For example, there is a free, that's right, free, Save My Marriage mini course. Hosted by Dr. Joe Beam, this free course provides the necessary framework to get your marriage to take a 180. In fact, he will teach you 3 things you can start doing immediately to get your spouse back. Now, my good friend, Dr. Joe Beam, has helped thousands of couples just like you. He has spent years developing research-based principles to fix relationships. The Save My Marriage mini course is free right now at LoveStories.com. So don't wait. Solve your crisis now by signing up at no cost at LoveStories.com for the Save My Marriage mini course. And like I said earlier, LoveStories.com isn't just for married folks. It's also for those of you still searching for love. So head on over to LoveStories.com to get help identifying the matters of the heart that are holding you back from finding your match made in heaven. That's LoveStories.com, LoveStories.com. Now let's get to my interview with Lysa TerKeurst. So, Lysa, seriously, another book on boundaries? Do we really need one?
Well, I do, and I'm thinking other people do too. I think there have been wonderful books on boundaries, and I think this one adds to the conversation a needed element. This book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, that I've written, will help people have the biblical confidence that boundaries are not just a good idea, they're God's idea.
And how did this play into your life? What inspired you to write it?
Well, I've been through a season of relational trauma, and for the people who have been following along with my journey, there were so many ups and downs and really hard twists and turns, and it resulted in the death of my marriage, which is what I call my divorce. It was the death of a really important, significant relationship. After my marriage ended, I had spent so much time working on the relationship that I decided afterwards I really wanted to work on myself. And one of the number one things I needed to work on and admit that I had contributed to some of the difficulties in the relationship, that was my lack of boundaries. And I think for me, I do struggle with people pleasing sometimes, but the raw honesty of even people pleasing is that I wasn't just doing people pleasing to keep another person happy. I was trying to keep another person happy so that they wouldn't take from me what I feared that only they could provide for me. And in a biblical sense, I really had to dig deep and admit that I will always desperately want from other people what I fear I will never get from God. If I fear that if I draw a healthy boundary and someone rejects me or is disappointed in me or walks away from me, chances are that other person may very well be disappointed in me, walk away from me, abandon me, whatever, even if I don't draw this boundary. And so I had to just really get honest with myself and decided to work on writing this book, not from a place of extreme strength in knowing how to draw boundaries and communicate boundaries and stay consistent with boundaries. But I wrote this book from my point of struggle. And I think the readers will feel very understood, seen, and I think they'll appreciate the everydayness that I bring, kind of the everyday grit and grime and relational nuances to a book like this.
So tell me one of the boundaries that you had an issue with. Tell me a story.
Okay. So I think part of the issue with me and boundaries is that I was giving level 10 access and other people were only bringing level 3 responsibility to the level 10 access I gave them. So it used to be that I would try to put a boundary on that other person to get them to be more responsible with the access that I'd given them. But boundaries really should never be used to control, manipulate, or even punish another person. And when we try to place a boundary on another person, that's going to be a really frustrating experience if that person is unwilling or incapable of making the changes that we want. So when there's that dynamic of me giving level 10 access and another person only bringing level 3 responsibility, I need to do boundaries the healthy way, which is I create a boundary in the situation around myself. And I reduce the level of access that I give to the level of responsibility that they are willing and capable of demonstrating. And this has just given me a really powerful sense that I can do something, even in relationships where I've hit that spot. It feels impossible, or I say, I just can't take this anymore, or I just feel powerless because the other person isn't making the changes that I think are necessary to keep the relationship healthy. So this has empowered me because while I can't control another person, God has given me the ability to remain self-controlled. And really that's what a boundary is. It's not to shove another person away. It's to help hold me together and help me stay self-controlled.
I think one of the problems we have with boundaries is when we establish them and put them up, we feel as though we're going to be rejected, or we're going to cause harm to a relationship, or we're going to end a relationship. Or it's going to be misinterpreted, right? Because the other party doesn't understand the boundaries we're putting, or it sounds like we're just shaming them, or.
Well, it is hard to establish boundaries once you've been in a relationship for a while, because even if we don't realize it, my counselor, Jim Kress, always says every relationship has a contract in that relationship. Now, it's not necessarily that we've written it down or that we've even talked about it, but there's this expectation that you do this and I do this, and that's kind of the unspoken relationship contract. So if you decide to implement a boundary in a long-standing relationship, you're changing the contract, and that person may not appreciate the change in that contract. So here's how you can know, though, that the other person is healthy. Healthy people, they may ask you questions about why the boundary is needed and, and what they need to do in response to the boundary to maybe eventually work out of the need for the boundary. But healthy people appreciate healthy boundaries. Unhealthy people have never met a boundary that they like. So I think it's a good gauge. If we are in a healthy situation, we can have healthy conversations and we can have healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries in that dynamic helps us avoid relationship extremes, where on one end of the spectrum, we're either so worn down and worn out, and we know we cannot keep saying yes, or we cannot keep tolerating what we've been tolerating, all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is where we're just ready to walk away from that person. So boundaries help us avoid those extremes, bring it back to the middle, and establish where the freedom is in the relationship. What I will and will not accept, what I will and will not tolerate, what is and is not possible. And so I think if you're in a healthy relationship, though these conversations won't be easy, they will be productive. If you're in an unhealthy relationship, then where there's chaos, there's a lack of a boundary, and that where there's chaos, there is a lack of boundaries, and that needs to be paid attention to.
So how did you get from unhealthy to healthy? What was the process? For somebody listening right now and they're on the unhealthy side of this equation, how can you help them get to the other side?
Well, I needed to develop some emotional fortitude, and that required a lot of self-awareness that I really wasn't capable of finding on my own. Sometimes it's really hard to be aware of our own issues and the things that we're contributing to some of the unhealthy or dysfunctional patterns in relationships. We get used to our own dysfunction. And so for me, that really required a good counselor and some solid friends around me to help me become more self-aware and to help point out red flags. I'm the kind of person that a red flag has to literally be burning to the ground before I tilt my head and go, that flag was kind of red, wasn't it? So getting healthy for me required some more awareness and emotional fortitude, but it also required biblical confidence in establishing healthy boundaries. And I think I was always hesitant to draw boundaries because I had this nagging question. Is it unkind to draw a boundary? Is it unchristian to draw a boundary? Is God okay with this? But I gained a lot of biblical confidence doing a deep theological study through the Bible of the topic of boundaries. And what I found just from the very beginning of the Bible, in Genesis 1, God established the foundations of the world using boundaries. He separated light from darkness, land from sea. Then in Genesis 2, I find it completely fascinating that of all the subject matters, of all the topics that God could have chosen to be the focus of his very first recorded conversation with man, he chose the subject matter of a boundary. And he established for Adam, this is where the freedom is. He said, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden. See how it was in the context of freedom and it was not overly restrictive? And then God was crystal clear, but you must not eat from this tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God didn't say that he couldn't eat from that tree because God was trying to be overly restrictive. God was actually trying to be protective of what Adam didn't know, and that is the heavy weight of the knowledge of evil.
So the whole premise of boundaries is biblical from day one, basically, is what you're saying.
From day one. And then even as you continue on through the Bible, I find it fascinating that in Genesis chapter 2, God gives one rule. Can you imagine a world where we only had one rule, one boundary to follow? That would be amazing. Mm-hmm. But then as Adam and Eve sinned and they were sent out of the garden, and sin kept happening, and more chaos and more sin, more boundaries were needed. And by the time we get to the law and the prophets, we went from one rule in Genesis 2 to the law and the prophets, there being over 600 boundaries. And I think that really tells us a lot about how serious God takes boundaries, that where there is chaos, he is a God of order, and boundaries help establish order.
Well, don't you think in today's world, we know these boundaries, but we keep changing the rules of the game so that that boundary really doesn't exist anymore. We've moved it 10 yards down the field. Whose boundaries do you go by? Whose rules do you go by?
Well, I think inside of each relationship, it's important to have that conversation and establish what are some healthy boundaries for you and what are some healthy boundaries for me. I'm convinced that more relationships die not because we attempt to have these challenging conversations and they don't go well, but rather because we avoided the conversations that really needed to be had. And I think my book, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes, I encourage people in relationships to read it together and to create a commonality between them that boundaries are good. And throughout the book, there's even scripts that I give people, because it's not just about establishing the boundary, it's also about communicating the boundary. And so I encourage people, read this book in community. Read Good Boundaries and Goodbyes with your friends, with your important relationships. And I think you'll both come to a deeper appreciation of how boundaries can actually improve relationships, not destroy relationships.
So you brought your daughter along with you today, Hope, sitting right over here.
She just absolutely loves you're pointing her out right now.
What is the number one boundary you've taught her over the last about relationships?
Actually, I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to say yes. The number one thing that Hope taught me is it is okay for my adult children to request that some things not be talked about. And, I think there's a challenge that a lot of us parents have when we've gone from the little kid stage to the teenage stage to the young adult stage. And now they're mature, grown adults. And I think it's healthy and it's actually really wise to teach our kids about boundaries as they're growing up, so that when they get to be young adults, they can establish boundaries and they have a healthy perspective of boundaries. And I so appreciated Hope establishing a healthy boundary, because it has provided good communication, and we're not both stepping on eggshells trying to figure out, can we talk about this? Can we not talk about this? And just the clarity of saying, this is one subject I will not talk about. She doesn't say, okay, right? She doesn't leave a question mark at the end. She just says, this is a topic I will not talk about, Mom. And it was that crystal clear. And at first, of course, I was like, what? But then I saw the health in it, and I really appreciated it, and the clarity helped me respect it so that we could keep our relationship in a really good place.
Hope, was she really that good about it? Yeah. Yes. Okay.
I'm a rule follower. So when people establish boundaries with me, unless they're a control tactic or a manipulation tactic, or they're trying to punish me, if it's a healthy boundary, I want to fight for the health of that relationship. And remember, healthy people respect healthy boundaries. It's unhealthy people that have never met a boundary that they actually like.
So how do you know if a relationship is healthy or unhealthy?
Well, all relationships have difficulties. But when a relationship shifts from being difficult to being destructive, we really need to pay attention to that. And where that line is, it's not going to be so clear cut for every relationship and every person. But if you hit a spot in a relationship where you start to say, I just can't take it anymore, something has to change, or I feel so aggravated and frustrated that I think I'm just going to have to walk away from this relationship. Before you do that, really have not only a great assessment in your own heart about why maybe some boundaries need to be implemented at first, but also get some other people to help you really think through it. And I had a really wise counselor who, by the way, his name is Jim Kress, and he weaves his brilliance at the end of every chapter just to give people a little therapeutic insight from a licensed professional counselor, which he is. But having other people speak into the situation and me being really honest about where that line was starting to be crossed from difficulties, which all relationships have, to destructive patterns that really needed to be addressed.
One thing I noticed is that you help readers understand healthy relationships by comparing them to bank accounts. How does that comparison help us understand the value of emotional well-being?
Well, I'm going to prove to you, if that's okay. We'll flip the script here for just a minute. And
am I logging on to my bank account? Is that what you want to see?
So I'm going to prove to you you're already really good at drawing healthy boundaries. So do you have a bank account? You already said you did, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a password so that not everyone can have access to your bank account?
Absolutely.
Okay. Is that because you're unkind? No.
No, it's because if I don't, somebody will go in and take all my money.
Right. So you don't freely give out your bank account information with the password to every person listening because you don't know if every person listening will be responsible enough to properly handle the limited supply of money that you have in your bank account.
All $14.
All $14, right? And you have responsibilities to pay certain bills with all 14 of those dollars, right? Mm-hmm. So we know very much that we don't give everyone level 10 access because if they haven't demonstrated level 10 responsibility with our bank account, then we don't give them access to the bank account. We know this with our finances, but we forget this with so many other areas where we are not unlimited. We are limited not because we're selfish, but because we're human. Only God has a limitless supply. And so we need to check our capacity, our relational capacity, our intellectual capacity, our physical capacity, and on, because we need to really be honest. I have this to give, but I do not have this to give. I can tolerate this. I will not tolerate that. And asking ourselves those questions, establishing our limitations is healthy and good.
So what are you hoping to establish? What do you want to achieve with this book? What do you hope people learn from it?
I think the subtitle of the book says it best: loving others without losing the best of who we are. We know we can't control other people, but it is our responsibility to be self-controlled. And the only way that the best version of me can be brought to not just this relationship, but all of my relationships is using healthy boundaries. And remember, boundaries are not to shove other people away. They're to keep us together so that we really can love others well without losing the best of who we are.
And finally, before we say goodbye, when do you know it's time to say goodbye?
Well, using that analogy I gave you before, if someone, it's not a mistake that we're looking for. We all make mistakes. But if someone has patterns that are destructive, that are unhealthy, that are just really detrimental to our well-being and maybe even to the well-being of the relationship, and they are bringing zero responsibility, then again, steps, not leaps, but we need to consider reducing the access down to their level of demonstrated responsibility. And sometimes that means zero. And I can hear some people thinking, wait. In the Bible, it says to lay down our life for our friends. I mean, didn't Jesus demonstrate this? He did lay down his life. And to that, I would say, you're right. Jesus laid down his life to accomplish a high and holy purpose. Jesus did not lay down his life to enable bad behavior to continue.
Lysa, thanks for stopping by the homestead here. I really appreciate it, and I wish you much success with this book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Lysa. It's always a pleasure to have you here at the homestead. Now, the book is already #1, folks, and I'm talking about #1 in personal growth and Christianity. at Amazon.com. So get it while you can. It's available right now. And this is a good one. Hey, this has been Contagious Influencers of America, the podcast from the producers of Keep the Faith. Please do rate and review us. Give us 5 stars, would you please? And write a nice little review. That is just awesome when you do that for me. And also check out all of our podcast episodes. You can see them all right there at contagiousинfluencers.com. There's all kinds of goodies for you, and you can listen to them right there or wherever you get your podcast. And also, our radio show website now has all kinds of wonderful shows by theme. So regardless of what season of life you're in right now, you can find one of our episodic shows there at KeepTheFaith.com that will really fill your heart and soul and fill your mind with good tools and information and inspiration. So check out KeepTheFaith.com. I'm David Sams, and you've been listening to CIA, Contagious Influencers of America, from the producers of Keep the Faith. Hey, go out there and live that life in living color this week, because it sure is a heck of a lot more interesting than living in black and white. I'll see you next time.